It's time for Supply Chain Now. Broadcasting live from the supply chain capital of the country, Atlanta, Georgia. Heard around the world, Supply Chain Now spotlights the best in all things supply chain. The people, the technologies, the best practices, and the critical issues of the day. And now, here are your hosts.
Hey, good morning. Scott Luton with you here on Supply Chain Now. Welcome to today's show. So on this episode, we're continuing our programming in partnership with the AIAG organization, the Automotive Industry Action Group, and in particular with AIAG's 2020 Supply Chain Summit. So stay tuned as we're going to be working really hard to raise and increase your supply chain leadership IQ. More to come on that in just a moment, but a quick programming note before we get started. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to check us out and subscribe wherever you get your podcast from. Search for Supply Chain Now and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss conversations just like this one here. All right, so no further ado, let's bring in our featured guest here. We're going to be talking with Brandon Mason, Lead Analyst, Global Market Intelligence with Eaton. Brandon, good morning.
Hey, good morning to you, Scott. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Enjoyed our little pre-show conversation with a little bit of baseball sprinkled in. I know you're a big Detroit Tigers fan, but tell us, where are you from, and you know, give us a Eureka moment that you may have experienced as you were working up through your formative years. Sure.
Well, born and raised in Michigan. I was actually born in Flint and grew up around the Flint area during my adolescent years. And, you know, I've been around the auto industry my whole life. Obviously, you know, Flint, the birthplace of General Motors. My dad worked at GM for 40 years. His dad worked at GM. So, you know, the industry was sort of all around me growing up. So there was really no, I don't say there's much discussion. You know, I didn't struggle too much with trying to figure out what I wanted to do in my professional career. It just felt right. So, you know, very passionate about the auto industry. And so, you know, growing up around the Flint area, you know, there were a lot of pros and cons, right? You got to see the might of the auto industry. You got to see the impact that it had on the communities in which it's involved. But yeah, obviously there were some dark times too. I mean, I remember, you know, my dad was laid off several times for long periods of time, and you know, the city really struggled and continues to struggle when they're over-reliant on one industry. And so I wouldn't say that was necessarily a Eureka moment, but just kind of solidified that I'm passionate about it. I want to be part of the solution in the industry. And you know, as we move forward and sort of start to transform around who we are, I think we can really play a leading role in the evolution of not only the auto industry, but society in general. If you think about some of the next gen technologies around autonomous and connected vehicles that are at play. You know, in terms of a Eureka moment, I guess maybe in my professional career, for those that have been in the industry more than 10 years, you know, the dark days of the last global recession, the Great Recession of 2009. And I remember sitting, you know, a few nights on my couch just wondering, you know, is there going to be an auto industry? And the industry's come a long way since then. Obviously, the innovation aspect has grown in multiples. And so to me, the Eureka moment is, you know, if we're going to survive, we need to continue to adapt and change and lead the way. So to me, that's kind of what's driving me forward as we think about the trends that are going to shape our industry for the years and decades to come.
Well put. And two things stick out kind of as you were sharing that. First off, on your last point, there is a ton of reinvention going on in the automotive industry and a ton of innovation. You know, I think one of the many good news stories in this challenging year of 2020 is how you're seeing automotive manufacturers make huge shifts to be able to produce ventilators, right? And fight, you know, serve the mission. Those are great stories. And secondly, going back to your father, your experience, your father's experience, his father's experience, just salt of their people that are on these plant floors that have some of the toughest jobs, toughest problems to solve in a production framework. I mean, salt of the earth people that make up the automotive industry.
Yeah, absolutely. And I spent a few summers in college working on the assembly lines as well. So I've got a really good appreciation of what those jobs entail and the work ethic that has to go into it. And you're right, there's a lot of prideful people in this industry that, you know, want to make good quality products. And, we need to make sure that we focus on that and continue to take care of those folks as well, because they're the backbone of this industry.
I'm with you. All right. Well said. Let's move right along. Let's talk. I know Eaton's a very large organization. We've got some sites down here. We're in our neck of the woods in Georgia. But if you could tell us what the company does at a high level, and let's talk about where you spend your time.
Sure. And, I think it's sort of interesting. My career, I've been in the industry again my whole life. I've only been at Eaton for about 7 months. And so if you do the math there, I started early March, right when all of the pandemic stuff was really starting to hit. So certainly interesting time to start a new position. And in my role as our market intelligence leader, trying to figure out what's going on in the industry, what are the main drivers, what's our path to recovery look like. Certainly an interesting time in one's career, but I'll get to that in a minute. To start off, so Eaton, as you said, yes, big company. We've been around for a very long time. In essence, Eaton is a power management company. So we're in aerospace, we're in electrical, we're in industrial, and then obviously within the vehicle group, we manufacture a number of different components and systems. We produce vehicle clutches, transmissions, valve actuators, torque control products, boosting products, and a whole host of other things. And then I would say, the last few years, we've really started to build up our e-mobility practice. So power management, power conversion, electronics tools to really fit that growing industry. Again, we talked a little bit earlier about how our industry is changing. We're trying to adapt and help lead the way in that change as well, because electric vehicles and that type of thing, both in the light vehicle and commercial space, are going to continue to grow. And so we want to make sure that we're adjusting our portfolio accordingly. In terms of my role, as I said, I lead our market intelligence team. So my job is and the job of my team is to monitor the industry, understand what are the big trends that are shaping our industry and our specific businesses, and try and advise leadership, and that'll help drive our strategy in terms of what we want to do, in terms of the products that we offer, the companies that we want to partner with, potential acquisitions. It all plays into that. And so as you can imagine, my team and I have been quite busy over the last several months as we've worked our way through this global pandemic and downturn.
I love, as you describe your role and the role you play within the organization, gathering the critical signals, not all the noise, but the critical signals that provides your leadership the ability to take advantage of opportunities, to move faster and make better decisions, which is really become table stakes here in the information age. So really neat there. We'll have to have you back, because I'm sure that we could talk for hours about some of the fascinating aspects of what your team's seeing. But for the sake of this interview here, let's pick one thing. When you look at global supply chain, global business in a historically challenging year like 2020 is, and we're all fighting through it, what's one thing that really sticks out that you've been tracking more than others?
Yeah, and to be fair, you're right. I mean, we could talk for plenty of time about all those things. So maybe I'll just list a couple quick nominations or honorable mentions, and then we can kind of get to one of the things that we're focused on most. So
I like your style, Brandon. I like your style.
Thanks, Scott. Things that we're kind of broadly tracking. It's funny, before the pandemic hit, we were talking a lot about emerging technologies, and we often use the CASE acronym, right? Connected, autonomous, shared, and electric vehicles. Those have kind of taken a back seat to some degree. And so I think the question going forward will be, what is the focus on those now? I think some will accelerate, some I think will have pause just because of some of the investment requirements. And then, customer preferences to shared vehicles and things like that have changed now. All right, so I'm not going to talk too much about that. Other things that we've talked about, fourth industrial revolution, I think that's something that will be accelerated as we go forward. We've often talked about it, but I think things about like augmented reality, free-ranging robots, and again, some of the things that the pandemic has brought up in terms of safety concerns and remote working and things like that, those type of things I think will certainly be accelerated. But if I had to focus on one thing, I think it's just around the uncertainty and how we plan for uncertainty. And we've always had uncertainty in our industry. That's not the question. But just if you layer on top of the monumental change that our industry is going through right now, we were ready to just make this fundamental shift towards new technology, new business models, et cetera. we have a, once in 100-year pandemic and then a pretty significant recession on top of it. And so, the uncertainty, I think, is what's grasping folks most notably. And I think a lot of us want to be cautiously optimistic about some of the news that we've seen. Certainly here in the U.S., sales and production continue to trend upwards. So I think to a lot of people's pleasant surprise, but we still have a long way to go. And so trying to understand the different models that are going to play out over the next 3, 6, 9 months, whatever it might be, is really difficult. And so that creates a lot of uncertainty in the supply chain and the industry as a whole around, what's that going to look like? It's hard to plan for something that's never happened before, let alone layering on all sorts of other things, right? We were talking this morning with our European team around the impacts of Brexit, for example, right? Remember Brexit? Maybe 6, 7 months ago, that was a huge deal. That's all anybody was talking about.
Right. It feels like 6 or 7 years ago at this point, doesn't it?
Exactly. And now, it took a back seat, I think, for most folks. And now it's kind of come up again about, wow, what's the impact of that going to be on top of everything else that's going on? So I think embracing the uncertainty to some extent is probably the best advice. Understanding that nobody's got a high level of confidence right now about what the next 6 to 12 months are going to look like. We hopefully have a better idea on the, let's call it the medium term picture. But I think the advice there is that folks have to build out scenarios and just have a hyper focus on those different indicators. And then make your plans according to that. It's hard to kind of put anything in ink right now, because before it dries, something has changed. So to me, the uncertainty, I think, is the biggest thing that we've been focusing on.
Well, the good news there, it seems like there's never been a greater thrust to identify these leadership blind spots and get them out, get them above surface level, so that we can, put contingency plans, do some scenario planning, and mitigate the risk that is alive and well, unfortunately, in so many different forms. So I appreciate what the good work you and your team do there at Eaton. Let's shift gears as we start to wind this brief video podcast down. Let's talk about AIAG. We're pretty blatant about it. We're big fans here at Supply Chain Now of the great work that AIAG does. We talked about your role, Brandon, and what you and your team do. Tracking down information, the best practices, and those critical signals. And you've got great associations and groups like AIAG that help make that easier for everybody that may not have internal expert analyst teams. So speak a little bit to your involvement with AIAG and where you see value.
Sure. And, we were talking before we started the show here that, I've been working with AIAG, and I lost track. I guess when you get to a certain age, you start to lose track. Numbers start to get a little fuzzy about how long you've been involved in something. But I would say close to 10 years have been working with the AIAG team and have presented at a number of their conferences. And we'll be speaking at the event virtually next month. And my hope is that sooner rather than later, we can get back to some in-person communication. But I will tell you, as I said, I'm very passionate about where I'm from. I'm very passionate about the industry, and so is the team at AIAG. And every time I go to an event, I'll sit around and I'll listen to the speakers before me and after me, and it's really impressive to see the passion that team has, and the advocacy and the education to try and show folks. I think those of us in the industry, we understand, right, the unique challenges of our industry, but we also appreciate the contributions that our industry makes across the spectrum. And I think a lot of folks don't realize that. And AIAG has done a good job, along with other advocacy groups, of showcasing the value and the expertise and the technology that the auto industry brings to the world. And so to me, I always find it very insightful to listen to folks from a broad spectrum of backgrounds and expertise at these events. And then, of course, the networking, always a good turnout at the events I've attended. It's always good to kind of talk shop with some folks. So to me, those are the big value adds to it. And of course, they let me get up and talk about whatever I want for, I don't always have a time limit, which is nice. So they let me get up and passionately speak about a lot of different topics related to auto. So I'm certainly grateful for that as well.
Love it. Love the community that AIAG has been building for years. Serving a critical industry for not just the American economy, but the global economy. So much great thought leadership right here and great relationships as part of the AIG community. So, all right. So Brandon, we want to make sure our listeners know how to connect with you and your organization after this interview. So what's the best way to do that?
Sure. So, I mean, if you want to know more about Eaton, it's easy. You can just go to our website. It's eaton.com. For specific topics, if you've got a question or want to discuss something, I'm, again, always happy to have that conversation with folks. So feel free to connect with me directly on LinkedIn.
Outstanding. All right. Well, really enjoyed our brief time here with you here on Supply Chain Now, Brandon. Best of luck as the Detroit Tigers get some new leadership and get things turned around. I'm sure their next World Series appearance is just around the corner. But really
I hope so.
We do too. Really appreciate what you do. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for being part of the AIAG community. And to our listeners, we've been chatting with Brandon Mason, lead analyst, global market intelligence with Eaton. Hopefully you've enjoyed this conversation as much as we have. Hey, if you enjoy it, check out Supply Chain Now wherever you get your podcast from. Subscribe so you don't miss great conversations like this here today. Hey, we're going to challenge you like we challenge our team each and every day. Do good, give forward, be the change that's needed. And on that note, we'll see you next time here on Supply Chain Now. Thanks, everybody.